Welcome to the Lynette Zang YouTube channel, where we support community and sound money globally. Make sure that you help us grow this channel by subscribing and hitting that bell below. And if you can find it in your heart to please like us on the way in so that you don't forget on the way out, we would really appreciate it because we need to grow this channel as quickly as possible. Now, last week, there was a huge shift that happened really, it's a global shift. And we need to be paying attention to this because whenever there is a pattern shift, it means something is happening. Even if you don't understand it, it is critically important that you recognize these pattern shifts because they indicate where we are in the trend cycle and how much longer this whole thing can stay together. So I'm going to jump in just by showing you some of the changes that happened last week and what we're likely to be in for in the very near future. So let's just go ahead and begin. This is a very big deal. We're going to talk more about this later or on another video, but the Swiss National Bank became the first developed market central bank to cut rates since the crisis. So it looks like central banks are finally getting a clue that there is a problem in the system that they created by zero interest rate policy for all of those years. More about that later. Taiwan sprung just as big a surprise by raising them. Some are lowering, some are raising them. They're supposed to be on the same page and do this in a coordinated manner, aren't they? I mean, that's the synchronization we've been experiencing really since 2008. But the Bank of Japan hiked for the first time in 17 years. We're going to talk a lot more about that today. Turkey raised by 5 percentage points while Brazil cut by 50 basis points. Most of the world's biggest central banks, led by the Federal Reserve, are uncomfortably on hold. They don't really, you need to understand these people are human beings, and they are trying to manipulate and manage a global monster that they created with all of this free money printing to help out their friends. Their job really is to support the financial system, not you and me. And now we're all going to pay the price of it. So I wanted to show you Japan's interest rates because this is key. And this goes back to 1973. And for the first time in 17 years, you can see they've been stuck at zero since the 90s, right? That's when their real estate and their stock market bubble burst. They recently, through lots of buying, managed to get it back up, as we've shown the stock market, but not the real estate market. And we're going to be talking more about that on Saturday anyway. But you see that itty bitty blip up, that is going back to zero. So they've been below zero in order to try and stimulate their economy. There is only one way to fight deflation: a stock market implosion, a real estate market implosion, and certainly a derivative implosion. That is all deflationary. Only one way to fight it, so it makes it easy, and that's with the inflation. But typically when you raise interest rates, you're trying to fight inflation. Now, one of our wonderful viewers lives in Japan and knows all about this, so I have invited him to have a conversation with me so we can have some boots on the ground. And I'm going to say that that's true all over the world because this is a global channel. And I can't live everywhere over the world. And we know how these central banks spin everything to make things look much better than they are. So whoever you are out there, if you would like to share your personal experience with all of our audience so that we can see the truth of what's happening on the ground where you live, please send that information or your inquiries and how we can contact you to hello@LynetteZang.com. I also want to say before I get back into this is that, I'll see comments and they say, oh, well, you should be doing this event or this show. Well, just to make sure that we actually know about it if you would send those to the media inquiries at LynetteZang.com. That you have a much better chance of us seeing that. We work as hard as we can, but sometimes. Okay, I digress. Let's go back to what's happening in Japan for the first time in 17 years. Well, that goes back to here, but they haven't had much luck really since the 90s. And they've done a lot to create this whole alphabet soup of manipulation. But I'd like you to notice that even the feeble attempts to raise rates in the past, though this has been true for every single country, has been a big fat fail. Is this time going to be different? Probably not. Central bank policy divergence in fragile global markets can trigger a crisis. So we're watching these divergences happen between, the Federal Reserve is on hold, but Turkey raised, the Bank of Japan raised, Taiwan dropped the Swiss National Bank lowered their rates, the Bank of, Taiwan also raised them. So you see this divergence? Now this system is really, really fragile. And so really since 2008, we've watched the central banks move forward in a coordinated way. This is not coordinated. This means risk. This is a pattern shift. Make no mistake about it. Now, Japan has been fighting deflation, and I've done videos on this. I can even do, more to help you understand it, but they've been fighting deflation since the speculative bubble in the 80s. So it's a very big deal that they have suddenly raised rates, because are they trying to slow down their economy? Are they trying to speed up? Are they just trying to do something different? But quite honestly, they're trying to generate inflation because they've been in deflation for so long. The whole world is watching, right? What's going to work here? Japan's central bank raised its benchmark interest rate Tuesday for the first time in 17 years, ending a long-standing policy of negative rates that is meant to boost the economy, but it didn't work. So, it wasn't, as I just showed you, that goes all the way back to the 90s. It doesn't work. And yet the world has agreed that Japan should not enter into hyperinflation. And let me say, yet. Let me just say yet. Because the world had to agree in order for Japan to even be able to do this alphabet soup of yield curve control and all of these experiments. But I want you to look at the yen, underweight of mounting short positions. A short position is selling something, quite frankly, that you don't have, and that can push the price down. And in theory, and in practice frequently, right? If you come in and you sell, it could be a stock, in this case it's a currency, and it pushes the price down, you buy it at that lower price, and the difference between what you sold it for and what you bought it for, there's your profit. The problem with a short position is that there are no limitations on what your losses can be. But that's what they're talking about here. Yen is underweight of mounting short positions, which means that traders are selling the yen. They are selling the yen. And in the meantime, the Bank of Japan, in buying most of their market, whether it's their stock market or their bond market, has pushed their stock market back to where it was back in, the early 90s. Well, is that true? Well, yeah, they did it. But it's all about manipulation. It's all about keeping the public where they want the public. It is perception management. And you need to be aware of that so that you don't get suckered in. Because I'm going to tell you, it's super simple. When it gets too expensive, in other words, when enough risk has been transferred from the few to the public, to the many, then they won't support these markets anymore. So it's all points to a growing tug of war between policymakers and markets over how far the yen can fall, because the central bank can definitely, and they do, go in and buy the yen. So what we're looking at here is one country, Japan, that's managing its markets, but there are other countries that are doing something different. That creates a lot more risk. Make no mistake about it. And the fact that there is a tug of war between policymakers and the markets should be significant, because this whole Ponzi scheme is based on confidence. But Japan's campaign against deflation has been the most radical. The bank's bid to spark demand by buying bonds and equities began after the equity bubble of the 80s burst. That was in the early 90s. The bank bought more than 1 quadrillion yen of Japanese government bonds in the decade to 2023. Well, if the central bank, and this is true all over the world now, this used to be what a third world country would do because there wasn't enough demand in the global markets to buy the government bonds. So the central banks have gone in and they've been buying the government bonds, right? Is that a real market? No, it's not a real market. And again, when it gets too expensive to support, they won't. And then the public will be left holding the bag. At one point, the central bank became the largest owner of the country's stocks and holdings of well over 400 billion. And yet, 52% of Japanese household wealth is held in cash. What does that tell you? It tells me that the Japanese public doesn't trust the illusion that the central bank created. But what they're counting on, and we're hearing this all the time in this country, in the US, is that all of that cash that's sitting on the sidelines is fodder to boost the already severely overvalued stock market that needs to be bought by central banks in order to be supported. Well, will this cash go into these inflated, overvalued markets? That's what everybody's counting on. And I'm not just talking about Japan. I'm talking about globally, and certainly here in the US. Big yen option bet risks crushing traders as intervention looms. Anybody that thinks any intangible asset that is in the markets is not subject to control by the central bankers who own the printing press and can create as much new money as they want to buy up these assets, it is not out of the system. You know what's out of the system? This is out of the system. This is out of the system. Not the spot system, and we're going to talk about that in just a couple of minutes. But the only thing you've got to have tangible to properly diversify whatever it is that you hold in intangibles. But with investors holding short yen positions, again, they're selling something they don't have. And I wouldn't call those investors. I would actually call them traders. And with even heavier intervention risks percolating, this may cause volatility in the yen. You think? We are watching market moves. This is the Bank of Japan. We are watching market moves with a high sense of urgency. We will take bold measures against excessive moves without ruling out any options. So that means that the Bank of Japan and the government is prepared to step in to again manipulate the markets. Now, who's going to benefit from that? Not you or me, not the general public, and even in this battle over the yen. But you need to be aware that confidence has been eroding for quite some time. I mean, the Federal Reserve first started buying our treasury bonds quietly, very quietly, in like 2000, right? So all of the central banks manipulate these markets. But again, we are watching market moves with a high sense of urgency. We will take bold measures against excessive moves without rolling out any options. So they're saying that they will do whatever it takes to crush traders. And they have the ability to do that because they can just create as much money as they want. So what we're looking at is one way to value money, right? And what they're talking about here is fiat money, to fiat money. It's critically important that you understand all the ways, and I've done some videos on all the different ways that you can value money. But the yen is the weakest that it's been since the 90s. And this is very, very, very significant because that goes back to the manipulations. And what that's telling you is that all of the manipulations that they've done didn't work. We are at the end of all fiat money life cycles. Period. End of discussion. So all of this manipulation, that's why it's not working anymore. And it's not working very well. And the last level of confidence was the markets to the central banks. And I'm telling you, we're watching. The markets don't trust the central banks. They know that they're going to do whatever it is that they need to do. So I wanted to show you, because they make a very big deal of fiat against fiat, US dollar to the Japanese yen. And this is a 10-year chart. And over that period of time, it's gone up 46.62%. Okay, so you were better off in the dollar versus the yen. Well, how about silver? Now, this is spot silver, so you have to understand that this is still an easily manipulated contract, right? But even spot silver almost doubled the spot silver versus the Japanese yen. And how about gold? Well, spot gold over the same time period protected you the best. So look, I like both, but I have them for different functions. I will be talking a lot more about the strategy because, quite honestly, wherever you are in the world, I want to help protect you. That's part of this community. We need community in two ways. We need it locally to get through this transition and sustain a reasonable standard of living, but we also need it globally so that when they're trying to shove these CBDCs down our throat, because they will, it doesn't matter what we want, they have an agenda. That's why having a strategy and having a plan personally is so critically important, and getting it executed as quickly as possible. And I just don't think that we have the luxury, like, you know, and I can't call it a luxury because I've been working really hard on it since 2010, but I did have time to make my mistakes. That's why community is so much more important now, because you have to find like-minded people that bring different things to the community so that you can come together and be stronger, because we are. Together, we can really do anything. So let me just finish this up, because I think it's pretty obvious what protected you the best. And these are all contracts. In the physical world, premiums are going up because demand exceeds supply. It's very telling what's happening in Japan. And I like to watch it because the whole world has been watching all of their experiments. And what all of this is telling you is what? In the early 90s, so 90s, 2000, you know, in the last 30 some years, everything that they did didn't work. This is the end. So if you want to show us your support, please give us a thumbs up. Make sure that you leave us a comment, even just to say hello. Share these videos, because ignorance does not make you immune. It just leaves you vulnerable. But the best way is to subscribe and get everybody that you know that you can get to subscribe and help us grow this channel. And if you have any questions about this, because we love questions, send them to questions@LynetteZang.com. And also don't forget, every Tuesday at it's at 10 Pacific time and at 1 Eastern time, I go live with my presentation, and then there's a period of time for questions after that. Make sure that you don't miss the interview that I recently did with Mario Aneko. I mean, he is one of my favorite people. I really do love him. I got to go visit him in London. but also some videos that if you haven't seen them yet, and of course, I think you should watch all the videos that we create here. But I did recently a Yawa, you asked, we answered, on states' legislation on gold and silver money and where we are inside of that process, and that gives me a lot of hope. Also, gee whiz, understanding the Bank of Japan's interest rate hike. I've been talking about these things regularly because there is a shift that's happening right now. So get into position. You gotta have gold and silver as your foundation, but you also need food, water, energy, security, barterability, wealth preservation, community, and shelter. These are the things that we need to be as independent and self-sufficient as possible. And it's critically important that you get this done as quickly as possible. Because together, there's no doubt in my mind, we can make a positive difference. So until next we meet, please be safe out there. Bye-bye.